Hi, something new from Ledoux Guitars, not guitar related exactly. I'm going to rotate the knives in a spiral cutter head planer. And I thought maybe you'd like to see this if you have a small shop or you're in guitar making and you happen to have one of these. It's not a difficult task, but there are some steps that I've found, being now halfway through the process actually, that might help you improve your results or make things a little easier for you. What I have is the Grizzly G0453Z planer. And this manual applies to my 15-inch as well as the counterpart 20-inch planer. And it did come with this addendum regarding the spiral cutter head. But there are no instructions for changing, excuse me, or rotating those knives. So I thought I'd show you what I'm going to do here. I do want you to keep in mind that it's a good idea if you go online to the Grizzly site, you can find the current instructions in their manual. You can download that easily. You'll find the current instructions about how to do that along with a few helpful suggestions. But I found some things that were not mentioned in the manual that I thought might give you a leg up. Please keep in mind that I am following their instructions. I'm interpreting what I saw in pictures and read. I'm not a Grizzly official. I'm not paid to do this. I'm simply sharing with you what I have found out. So we're going to turn and take a look at the tools and equipment and various things that you're going to need to take care of this job. What you'll need to do the job will be, I've used a cordless drill to remove those inserts. However, you want to be careful about that. You may want to switch to a ratchet. We don't want things to happen too quickly in the event that those are real tight. I have a torque wrench. This is a torque wrench that measures in inch-pounds. It's recommended that these inserts be put back in and torqued to between 50 and 55 inch-pounds. And I think that's very important. The manual does not tell you that you must do this, but I think if they're that specific, there's a very good reason. You'll need the various bits, Torx bits and so on, to take those out and remove. I have this auxiliary handle to put them back in because I can spin them back in quickly by hand before I torque them. And this is just a stock wrench that came with the planer. You may need it. A magnetic pickup. We'll get to that later, but yep, it's a pretty good idea. You'll need some machine oil, very light machine oil. I'm using Starrett, probably doesn't matter. You could use sewing machine oil, whatever. And I have a box back here and a marker. The marker is important, a black Sharpie or whatever color you want. And I'm going to use the box to put my parts and pieces in as I go. I got a small container here and a very small artist brush. I'm putting that machine oil in that because we want to put a little bit of oil on the machine screws, very little, and that's why the artist brush. Over here, I've got some naphtha, and we're going to use that to clean up our parts. One of the first things I found is if those parts are not clean, the inserts don't set where they belong, and being raised only a couple of thousandths of an inch really costs you something in terms of the finish that you get. The other thing that you can use is compressed air. Nothing like it. Now, you can use that to clean out the area in the planer. If you don't have compressed air, a brush will do. And if you have stubborn dust or something, maybe even a little toothbrush or so on. The very first thing you're going to do is unplug the planer. Unplug the planer. I know you may think, well, it's not going to start, but let's be overcautious. It's always a good idea. You never know what's going to happen. If you happen to have this planer set up where it's hardwired in, then please trip the breaker. But by all means, reduce all risk of injury when you're doing this. So I have already done 2 rows of these, so I'm going to revisit and then we'll start over with a new row. I want you to notice that I have numbered the rows of inserts. And that way I can keep track of which ones I've done and which ones I haven't. Now, you'll also notice if you look at the inserts themselves, you see I've taken that Sharpie and put a black mark on one edge of each one of those, always the same edge, because I want to be able to know which ones I've changed, and I want to know which direction I rotated them. There's no point in taking these out and ending up with the same dull or poor edge after you get all done. How disappointing would that be? So let's see if we can get started. I'm going to start by removing all of the inserts in one row. Now, you could do each one of these one at a time, but I think it takes a lot more time. So I'm loosening these up. I'm putting the screw in the wood box I showed you, and I'm dropping the cutter insert into the jar of naphtha that I just showed you. And I have a reason for pulling all of the inserts in one row before I do anything else, and that's because I want to thoroughly clean the entire area. Okay, I have all of these inserts removed from one row in the cutter head, and my first step is going to be to take some compressed air and just blow that out a little bit. That's not going to be the end of that, but we'll get the dry stuff out, loose stuff at first. Now, if you don't have compressed air, a brush will do. Probably even a toothbrush would do you real well. But now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over this area and wet it with this little brush here with naphtha, because you can probably see right here at the tip of my finger, I don't know if you can see them, these deposits of wood residue. You know, it's resin and tar buildup from probably from planing too many conifers. But I want to loosen that up. I don't think those will affect the cutter itself because they're below it, but now is a good opportunity to get those gullets cleaned out. One thing is for sure, the cleaner those gullets are, the more efficient the cutters are going to be. And once I've wet them a little bit, they need a little bit of help. So, I guess you can see this. I'm going to take this dowel that I've sharpened into a little spatula-like thing here. Oh, there you go. You can see that. I'm using that to just clean that residue out of there. And you may have noticed if the camera picked it up, a little piece of that just fell out down into that threaded hole. So we're going to want more compressed air when we're done. So I'm going to clean each one of these quite carefully. And you may need 2 applications of the naphtha to get this job done thoroughly. But the big thing is you want the seat area for each one of these inserts. You want that seat area absolutely clean. You will experience a deterioration in finish results if that area is not thoroughly clean. The next thing I'm going to do, now that I have this area all cleaned out, is I put all of these inserts as I took them out in this bath of naphtha. And here's why the magnetic pickup. I'm going to take each one of those and I'm going to thoroughly clean it. And you may find, as you're doing that you'll want to take one of these little paddle tools I made here and push some of the residue off those, especially on that bottom surface, but even on the sides. Those sides rest over here on the sides of the opening, and I don't think there's any pressure on them, because if there was, they'd break. But still, you want to get these as clean as you can. And when you set these down, put the sharp edge up. There's a reason. Now I'm going to do all of these before I return and put any of them in. You could do them one at a time, but you must follow the same procedure each time. This is just a little more efficient to remove the row, clean each tooth, and then put them all back in. One other thing I do want to mention is the manual suggests that you wear leather gloves when you're doing this. If you put leather gloves on when you deal with these inserts, you're going to lose them down in here. It's going to be clumsy. you might as well put on a pair of mittens for all that matter. These cutters are very, very sharp. There's no question about it. They'll cut you silly. But if you're careful with them, you can handle them. It'll work very well. Maybe a pair of the thin rubber gloves would be a thing that you want to use. And if you're concerned about handling the naphtha, that may also assist you in that regard. But if you wear heavier gloves, you're not going to get anywhere with this stuff. So I've cleaned each one of these inserts one at a time, soak them in naphtha, brush them off, wipe them off with a rag, and even use that little wood tool I had to get the residue off the bottoms. And I've got them in a tray here. But before I assemble them, I want to look at each machine screw that's used to mount them. You want to make sure they're clean. And they suggest in the manual that you put a little bit of oil on each one of these, and that's important because the oil is going to help them release when you have to take them back out. But they make it very plain, not too much oil, because it can force its way back up through the threads and push up on the insert a couple of thousandths of an inch, and it will actually have a negative effect on your threads, or excuse me, on the position of the cutter. So now I'm going to reassemble this into the cutter head. So I take my insert and I take a screw and I assemble that, and then I just discovered that if I use my magnetic pickup, I can hold on to that whole assembly. It makes things a little bit easier, and I can just touch it into where it belongs. I let the cutter insert drop down into position, and I can tighten that down, thread it down, and I'm using my hand tool here to just run that down quick. And I was careful to put my ink mark, I don't know if you can see that, my indicator mark in black ink in the position where I want it so that I know which way I'm rotating. So I thread that down, just get a little overhand tight, and then I'm going to use my torque wrench, which I have set at 52 inch-pounds of torque. And there it is. So now I'm going to repeat this process for the entire row. Quick addendum here. As I put these inserts down, I put down one at a time and I bring it up to torque specifications. I do not recommend that you put 2, 3, or a whole row together, because if you do, if you fail to torque one of those down, you accidentally skip one, believe me, the planer may very well let you know later on when you least expect it. So what I've got for all of my effort is a good, clean, smooth surface. It feels glassy, as it should, under a new, sharp cutting edge. I'm not feeling any ridges across here, so I'm going to conclude that the job went very well. I believe I mentioned earlier in the video that I had already done this process, but what you should know is that the first time around, I neglected to do all of the cleaning and the necessary things that I've shown you in the video. And as a result, the planer would plane with the best of them. The difference was that the surface was clearly not as clean and smooth, and I ran a test. After I planed a board, I scraped it and found that to get down beyond those mill marks, it cost me 0.08 of an inch in thickness. it's not so much the amount of thickness that is the problem as it is the time to get that off of a surface, say the size of a tabletop or even any wide board. Why bother when you can make your planer better in the first place? So I went back through and did just that. I want to remind you to unplug your machine should you be doing this or any other maintenance to your equipment. And while we're there, if you have one of these planers, I don't care who made it, they're all basically the same. Change the transmission oil. You got a gearbox in here that runs all of these things. It runs on 90-weight gear oil. Some of them leak slowly, so you have to watch how much they go down. It's hard to do because it's difficult to get to, but it's worth doing. Make sure you change that oil. I want to remind you to get all of the documents. I'm sure you have manuals and things with your planer, but if it doesn't have up-to-date documentation on how to rotate or change those knives, get it. I also recommend that you get a torque wrench to do this with. The manual does not say that you must have a torque wrench, so I assume that they're not insisting on it. But I've discovered just through doing and redoing that the consistency in the tension on those screws probably makes a considerable difference. And lastly, procedure. Make sure that when you proceed, you do this in a specific logical order so that you don't forget anything, you don't forget to rotate a knife, you don't forget to torque one down, because that could cost you some machine parts and maybe even some personal injury. We certainly don't want that. So having done all of that and other proper maintenance on your planer, you should be getting good, flat, clean surfaces, provided that what goes in the planer has a flat surface against the table in the first place. And lastly, after you've done this, even the best of them will show in the light little tiny hazy mill marks from those knives. You really don't even feel them very much. You can hear them under a scraper. But if you want the very best results, try one of these. Thanks for watching. I want to conclude this video by making some comments and things about this planer and other planers of this configuration. These are manufactured in China and Taiwan, and they have several different brand names on them. And I suppose you might find some variation in them, but I think they're pretty much the same thing. This planer has been in use, this particular one, has been in use since July 2008. And it has been used well, and it's been used hard. It has planed exotic woods, it's planed everything in the Northeast, the hickories, the oaks, cherry, the walnut, the whole thing. It's been through all of it. And it has performed admirably. And I have a point of departure to compare with. Earlier in my career, I've experienced the old Oliver planers and the old Powermatic planers when Powermatic was still made in McMinnville, Tennessee, and the old Delta equipment. And while it's nice to look back on that stuff and think of the good old days as being somehow superior to today, I'd like to encourage you to think about what really we have now, what we have today. That stuff is nice, but it was not trouble-free, and some of it was nothing but trouble. But back to these machines. If these are properly maintained and set up when you get them, you unpackage them, they will perform as well as any planer can be expected to perform. They will plane with the very best of them. My particular recommendations are: 1, proper setup of the machine when it's new. 2, maintenance of your machine. Keep that gearbox oil fresh, make sure it's right up there. Keep your infeed and outfeed rollers adjusted. Keep your pressure bar adjusted. All of these things contribute to the performance of the machine. And lastly, I cannot say enough about dust collection. Everybody puts a 4-inch port on their dust collectors. I have one on mine. And I can't really do anything about that unless I want to go to a tremendous amount of expense. But as soon as I come off the machine, I jump to a 5-inch line as quickly as I can, and I'm moving probably 750 cubic feet of air a minute across this machine, and it makes a tremendous difference because keeping the inside of the machine clean during operation allows it to perform its best. The particular planer that I have, the brand and the model, yep, I think it's a darn good one. If I had to buy another one, I'd probably buy another Grizzly. But I'm sure that the other manufacturers, one could say the same thing about all of them. So what I'm trying to get to you is, if you don't have one of these and you're thinking about buying one, don't be too afraid of this machinery. It's good machinery if you use it right and if you properly maintain it. Thanks for watching.